Hi, this is Sai here. What I want to do today is I want to go through the free source website, the code of which is open source and on GitHub as of 4 days ago. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk through as a Drupal developer slash architect some of the decisions that are made in there and some of the interesting things, some of the stuff that might be a little bit different to how other people do it. And because I don't think this gets done enough, I don't think we get a chance enough to see how people do things in the wild. So look, I'm going to dive straight into it. So if we look here, I've got the codes up here that we're reviewing is up on GitHub. So it's in this freeze-au/ce repository. And and there's a bit of a readme that you can go through. It talks a bit about the philosophy and about some getting started notes and so forth. I'm going to dive into that. If you do have any questions about it, feel free to jump into the discussions in the repository. More than happy to discuss any aspect. You can be critical or whatever you like to be. So that's the code base. Let's jump to the local. So here is the code base on the local machine. So the first thing I want to show you is the settings.php setup that I've got. So website's default is standard Drupal, and we have the settings.php that Drupal's going to call. Now, I like to keep this fairly trim. You'll find in my files, I'll have a link to the original source code of the original file that this came from that describes all of the different settings that are in there, because that's a really long file. And what I like to do is I like to kind of visually see what's in a settings file. I like to see what config's been overridden. So you can see that there. There's a few little things. And usually if there's a thing, it's commented on. So for example, the hash salt, we don't set the hash salt, but when it goes to platform SH, the hash salt does get set by platform SH. Trusted host patterns. Now that is normally not a secure pattern, but this is actually advisable by platform SH because they have different ways to mitigate the issues around this. So a lot of these things are defaults that come out of that standard settings file that ships with Drupal core, and then there's a few extras that are just sort of site-wide. And then in this part of the code, there are three includes. The first include is basically this platform sh settings.php. So in other words, it detects if there's an environment variable for platform sh, and if there isn't, it includes that file. Now that file is pretty vanilla platform sh. This is typically what you'll see with these files is that they're a copied version, and you can go and look for that, and you can go and look in their templates, and you can find this version. Some might. I kind of don't like copying this in. I sort of wish it was kind of included in a vendor folder, but in a vendor library. But as it is, this very rarely changes. Doesn't really change. For each of the settings files, I like to have a services file, even if there's nothing in it. Now, it's a little bit of a habit of mine from bigger projects. From bigger projects where you have a whole bunch of different settings files, it may or may not have service YAML files that go with them, because the typical thing in a settings file is to include a services file from a settings file. Now this is completely opposite to what a lot of people do. The Drupal core by default, the pattern for naming these files is settings.blah.php. And because I like to group the files together, I buck that trend. I mean, someone's got to do it. Someone's got to, be a trendsetter and be really annoying for everyone else. But I really do feel I go across a lot of different projects, go across a lot of different code bases, usually where I'm not in control of the code base. And I've seen a lot of patterns for running settings.php files and configuration. And I kind of don't care. I expect it to be unique, and I expect it to be reflecting the personality of the team that put that together. And really, I just don't want it to be overly abstracted. Most of the time, this is set and forget stuff. So that's the platform sh settings. Now you'll also notice that I have this docker.settings.php. And where is my settings.local.php? Now settings.local.php, is a convention. It is the one that's looked for by default. Everyone says, where is that? But because I'm from a local point of view, I am setting, basically this is zero configuration setup. You don't need to create a settings.local.php in this project. You either run ddev or lando and it will be automatically set up. But you can, and before I get to that, sorry, before I get to setting that up, there's a few other things going on here, and it's all local development defaults, trying to be sane defaults. So turning off CSS pre-processing, error levels, making sure they're high, putting some things into the cache. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. There's even stuff that you may want to turn off because your local environment's too slow. So I kind of will feel that out depending on the size of the project. But this is pretty boilerplate for me. I kind of carry this type of thing around from project to project and from a local development environment point of view. And I don't really document some of these. They're well documented in the core settings, right? I kind of don't think it's. I'm kind of a bit weird about comments. I like comments, and I don't like kind of meaningless comments. Sometimes something's pretty obvious what it's doing. I will not comment it. So that's the two types of files I have. The Docker setup has the Twig debugging turned on and so forth, and this null backend factory, so that all those cache lines work. And then if we go back to the settings.php file, finally what we see here is this does the local settings.php exist? So for all of the traditionalists, not the traditionalists, but because I've named it local settings.php instead of settings.local.php. But for the people who are like, oh, I want to create my local file and I want to override these stupid default settings that are on this project, knock yourself out. So that's all fine. I typically don't have it, I guess, because I'm the one who set this project up. So I'm like, well, all of the defaults make sense to me, but I'll use this myself. I'm like, I want to turn something on or off in some sort of context and so forth. Right. Probably went on too much about that. So there's my settings. So when we're looking at this project, we're only running DDev on this project, even though we're supporting Lando. And so, as I've said in other videos, I'm kind of waiting for Lando version 4 to come out. And at the moment, I'm just sort of enjoying DDev. It's a very good tool, so I'm more than happy to use it. But I have some very specific ways of setting it up. So with my DDev, I don't use its default config, the auto config, because it adds a whole bunch of commenting in here, and I just know exactly what I want, and that's what I ask it for. So you'll see that I disable settings management. I don't want my development environment injecting things into my settings. No problems for other users, but this is how it goes. This is like the development environment is my tool, and so I'll tell it how to work. So that's that, and we also set this drush. We inject this drush variable into the container so that matches it the way we want to run it. Because I use a lot of drush aliases typically, and so this basically makes it work locally. Okay, next. So now let's jump in and install the site. So we're going to be running some commands, mostly from these. You can see I've just previously started DDev, and it's added a whole bunch of its other configuration that's not committed to the repository. Now I've got the commands I want in this host directory, a lot of the commands. I've got a command to rebuild the front end, so that's just running a couple of npm commands. I've got a command to run Cypress tests. I've got this refresh, and that's going to sync that will sync the database from production and clear the cache. And I've got this command to run the state testing, and this is the command that will rebuild the site locally using content, and I'll show you that in a second. Right, so we're going to start running some of these commands. So DDev start. Oh, and I should say that these are just going to be referenced in the repository. So if we go into the repository and we see, now I'm actually improving some of these instructions as I go along, because I haven't given them another test since I deployed this, since I updated everything. So okay, so we've run DDev start. We're now going to run DDev composer install. So we have to start DDev to have access to composer if we don't have composer on the host. So that's all fine. I just ran that just before. And then And then the next thing we want to do is we want to log into the website. We'll build the front end tools as well. So ddev build fe. That'll just generate the CSS files mainly. And then we should be able to log in. Okay, so here's our URL. Okay, so here's our site running locally. We are now logged in. If we go to the home, we can see the content. We go back to the site, we see the front end. So that's our local site running now. Okay, so that's it for ddev. I've got the site running. No more about that for the moment. Let's just have a quick look in some of these other folders about to see what's going on in there. We have GitHub workflows. So we've got an end-to-end Cypress testing and static testing, very basic template for GitHub. And we have the platform settings. So it gives us the routes and services that are used on Platform SH. We have our config directory. So config sync. And in the config sync directory is all the config that builds the website. And then Cypress. Cypress, we have the configuration. So this is a standalone Cypress setup. So there's a package, packages, Cypress config, not a lot of Cypress config. And then in the Drush folder, there's not a huge amount. There's the couple of scripts that Platform SH provides just to generate Drush aliases on the platform. I don't even have a dependency on those the way I run it, because I usually have this self.site.yaml, and what that does is that provides the a couple of aliases, any aliases that I want that I'm using on a regular basis. I've got those aliases there, and I just simply set that up at the start of the project. And next is, so vendor directory, that's all good. So there's a couple of config files here. Now a lot of this stuff is kind of pretty default Drupal, so I haven't varied any of this based on what you're going to find in Drupal core. So like editor config, this is a Platform SH file from its template. And then again, this is all pretty standard Drupal stuff. Git ignore. There's the Platform SH applications configuration. This is my file, so I tend to try and tell Prettier to not muck around with composers.json. There's a few things in that I don't want it to restructure. But other than that, it's all pretty standard. There's the composer.json. Kind of come back to that in a second. PHP-CS is pretty specific. There's a couple of patterns that I exclude. So I don't really like PHP-CS telling me that it doesn't like a long comment. I'm like, I don't care. Like, comments are comments. They're not code. And, I don't mind full stops and stuff like that. But if a comment runs too long, or if someone wants to put multiple lines of comments, I don't really want a tool telling them not to put the comment in. I kind of want to read their comment. So that's a bit of a personal preference. This PHP-CS is set up to use these Drupal practice. I think the Coda module provides those. And then PHP Stan, we've got the PHP Stan up to level 9, which is fine. There's hardly any custom code in here. And then we've got the README. All right, let's have a quick look at let's jump in now to the composer.json. Okay, so composer.json, you can see I've sort of spent a bit of time customizing the actual config variables. You often go into a site and these will say like composer Drupal template or whatever, and just the defaults. But this is your project, so customize these values. If we scroll down, there's not a lot of custom modules in here, and in fact, a lot of them are just sort of like for my fun, I guess. There's most of them for sort of editing support as well. So okay, so we've got stuff like embed, CK5 edit, CK editor 5 template. So these are a reflection of this site being for building a blog with CK editor for doing the content. We could discuss a few of these. There's probably 2 or 3 of these modules that I may never use, that I might have just come across from a previous project. And an example of that is field label. Now, field label allows you to modify a label per per bundle of an entity type. If you don't know what that means, you probably don't care. But yeah, so there's just a couple of preferential things that have to do with this being a blog that I've built for myself to write content. And what else have we got? Require dev, all of the standard stuff here. Won't go into more detail about that. The other thing I wanted to show you was, okay, so with the formatting for some of this stuff, you'll often see some of this stuff formatted in a really verbose way. I like to just keep, like this installer paths configuration, I like to keep this very flat, like you never change it. I don't want it to take 100 lines of code because it's all structured in a certain way, which is why I don't have prettier kind of re-rendering this file on save. And then this file mapping thing is something that I don't know if I've ever seen anyone else really do this, but really what I'm telling Drupal is don't put all of the files that are meant to be useful for a new person building Drupal. I don't want all of those files. Those files are happy to exist on Drupal.org. They don't add any value to my code, and really they just create a lot of noise in my code base. So the way you can do this Drupal scaffold configuration is you can set these files to false. So I'm pretty much saying don't put a htaccess file there. I'm not using Apache. I'm using Nginx, and don't put these example files, example setting files, and so forth. And what I find is when you go and look through the files, you'll find that it's a much cleaner code base. Some of these are personal preference, 100% personal preference. And there's not much else to say about that. So that's the composer JSON. So the philosophy of the theme is I really wanted to do a Tailwind theme, but I wanted to do it in such a way that kind of like I wanted to take as much of the Drupal core stuff out. Like it's still a Drupal theme, like don't get me wrong. And then the whole idea of Tailwind is you're putting your classes in Twig files, which are Drupal. But the main philosophical approach that I had here was that I kind of wanted to try to make the Twig templates in Drupal as clean as possible without degrading functionality. And so let's look at how that's achieved. So a lot of the files in this theme are basically boilerplate. There's a bunch of logos and things like that in here. There's the Tailwind config. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch on the Tailwind config first. We're using Vite to build. We've got the Tailwind here is using, it's going to briefly touch on this because it could be a whole other video. It's scanning certain files to know where classes might be being used, trying to use as much of the base typography as possible. Not necessarily succeeding all the time, but that's definitely something that I'm learning as I go along. So there's post CSS, and that post CSS is describing what the plugins are. And then if I jump over, I've got a little source code. I've got my CSS source. I've got a CK5 editor source, and I've got a main PCSS file, and so basically this is my only CSS, and in some cases there's stuff that I would like to move into the Twig templates to try and stick with the Tailwind philosophy, but in many cases it's like things that I'm learning, like I don't do a lot of front end, so you'll find some things in here that where I'm like going, I want to use grid template columns and grid template rows and grid template areas, but I haven't done it before. I'm going to do this in this one place, and I'm not going to put all these classes into Tailwind Twigs, into Tailwind classes in Twigs. So there's a little bit of a mix of stuff going on there. There's stuff that I would like to improve over time, and I'm also got an eye out for Tailwind 4. So I'm probably not going to improve anything until I see Tailwind 4 land, because it's going to have a bit of a knock-on effect on a few things that I'm using. Okay, so that's basically the Tailwind configuration as such, and then the rest of the Tailwind is classes that live in templates. So we can't really talk about it unless we talk about the templates. In the theme, you can see this is a new version of PHP Storm, so I haven't added any plugins yet. So this is a PHP file, I promise you. And but but it's not getting syntax highlighting. And so what we've got here is like, this is really important. So what this does is it tells Drupal that for all of these types of data, sort of what you'd call first class types of data, so images and Boolean fields and created fields and stuff like that, then use this bare template that doesn't have any wrapper markup in it. So pretty much this hook is doing 99% of the heavy lifting in terms of stripping tags and stuff out. I don't have to implement all of the twigs that in order to just remove things. I only need to implement twig files in order to add classes to things or change the structure. So that's like a really important alter there. I'm not going to go into the rest of the code here. It's probably easy to read it. And so then when I go into my templates, I'm pretty much like, you might not know this, but Drupal lets you put templates in any kind of folder structure that you want. So at the moment, I've kind of loosely put this into forms, entity related stuff, component stuff that doesn't really have a good place elsewhere, and then layout stuff, and then media. When I say components, I'm not using single directory components or anything like that, because I'm at this stage, I think you'd want to be really serious to use that. It's very coupled. It's not native web components. If you've used those, if you've seen those, there's all this configuration that goes into them. So when I say components on this website, I really just mean some sort of discrete thing. Probably could call it an atom or a molecule or something like that. Would be just as fitting. And so you'll see, so I don't have really anything else to say about this, but that's the number of twig templates at the moment. You will notice in the templates that I never include all of the documentation from the template that I'm overriding. So for what it's worth, this theme does not have a base theme. So when I'm overriding something, I'm generally overriding a twig template in the system module. And when I do that, I take out all of the custom comments. So if I close other tabs, let's go and have a look at this file, this import.html.twig. I remember how to open things in PHP Storm. So you can see here that, and this is a pretty minimal one, you can see here that twig files will generally have this documentation that describes additional variables that are going to be used in that. And so what I kind of do is I go, if those variables upstream change, I don't care. I don't want to have to update this twig file if they change. And the reality is, in real world projects, people copy these comments into their override and then they never maintain it. So I think that's a bit of an anti-pattern. So you'll see in all of the templates that I override that all I just do is kind of go, hey, this is overriding this template initially. So if you want to go and look at the documentation for this template, go and have a look over there. You'll also see that I'm trying to keep my twig classes separate. This is really common in Drupal to see this like attributes, what is basically an attributes class that'll print out all of the different attributes for the tag, and then you can call add class and you can pass extra classes in. And so what I want to do is I want to keep this the same. I pretty much want to keep this exactly the same as what you would find in core for developer usability and maintainability, and then separate all of the Tailwind classes into a separate array and then add them in. So I'm doing that a lot, and that's largely that's most of the complexity that's going on there is pretty much covered. I guess just looking at the site layout is being mostly applied in the page.html.twig with no other variations. So I've kind of this is where the anti-pattern for Twig Tailwind comes into play, is that the whole idea of Tailwind is that your classes are specifically doing specific CSS things, and you don't have to go and find the CSS file where that class exists in order to understand what it does. So this is where I've kind of like I'm kind of stalling a little bit in terms of how I do this in Tailwind. So the structure of the site has this site layout, and then as you go into various parts of that layout, you'll see these layout classes, and those all you'll find all of those in the main.pcss file. And most of the layout, I think all of the layout, is being done from this file. This module is about installing default content. So when you are downloading the site, you don't need to have access to the hosting environment. You can run this ddev scratch, and what this command does is it essentially reinstalls Drupal. It imports the config from the directory as it is, and then it installs all of that test content. So basically, there's a module called default content that scans this file and says, "Oh, you want me to install some config content for you, do you?" And that content lives in here. And there's a drush command for exporting this content. So it was very easy to do. I really just took the existing site and I exported all of the content I wanted to be default. So here you can see this is one of the blog posts. This is the home page. This is the thank you page for the web form, and so on. So all of that content, I ran a drush command. I exported that content, and then that gets installed in this. That gets installed when this module gets installed. Okay, that's about it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I realize it's a bit rambly and so on, but I kind of wanted to make sure I kind of captured, okay, I guess this point in time, and just give you give the type of, if you're the type of person who likes to hear someone talk through these things, this is the video for you. Other people are just going to look at the code, they're never going to watch this video, but yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, I appreciate you for watching it, and I hope you have a really lovely day.